Hal's Columbia Gorge Chronicles presents Homesteading Multnomah Falls. This is the first of 3 videos about how Multnomah Falls became a public park. In this video, we'll see how the railroad claimed the land at the falls for depot land, and how William C Griswold homesteaded the site and then gave it to his daughter Jenny Griswold. Please enjoy this video about homesteading Multnomah Falls. Multnomah Falls is about 30 miles east of Portland, Oregon, and the most visited natural wonder in Oregon. Beginning in about 1853, people could see the falls from the river. Many artists and writers sketched and described the falls from the deck of a riverboat. In the early 1880s, riverboat excursions began bringing hundreds of people to the falls. In 1883, sightseers could visit the falls by train. Access to Multnomah Falls made it a scenic wonder for all to see. Most people are surprised to learn that over 100 years ago, Multnomah Falls was not protected as a public park. In the 1890s, there were no bills before the U.S. Congress or the Oregon legislature to preserve Multnomah Falls as a park. All federal and state legislation was designed to distribute the land and extract the natural resources. Preserving scenic qualities for public enjoyment was not a public value until about 1900. The visitors who enjoyed the falls didn't know that the land was in the public domain and available to be sold or claimed under the many land claim opportunities provided by the U.S. General Land Office or the Oregon State Land Board. The land at the foot of Multnomah Falls had very little economic value. It was remote, and the only land that could support buildings was owned by the railroad. There were no minerals, and the timber was on steep terrain. The land could be purchased from the government under Preemption Act of 1820. The price was set at $1.25 per acre. 160 acres could be purchased for about $200 plus some fees. William C. Griswold filed to homestead the land at Multnomah Falls in April 1891. The huge volume of water coming over the falls could be a source of immense power, either mechanical or electrical. Converting the falling water into energy would require a financial investment not expected from a stereotypical homesteader and not the intended purpose of the Homestead Act. We will see how the railroad and private interests acquired the land surrounding Multnomah Falls. The United States Congress passed the Railroad Act of 1875 that granted the railroad a 200-foot wide right-of-way across federal public land. This map shows the railroad tracks as built in 1883. Multnomah Falls and Horsetail Falls are highlighted in yellow on this map. The railroad laid tracks along the southern shore of the Columbia River. The railroad tracks hugged the base of the cliffs. The land extending towards the Columbia River is the delta of Multnomah Creek. The tracks at Multnomah Falls were the first man-made item added to the landscape. Multnomah Falls became a site for celebrations. The railroad inaugurated the railroad tracks with the Silver Spike celebration on October 3, 1882. This is the receipt for the purchase of the Silver Spike. One train came from Beaver Creek, Montana, and another from Portland. The trains met nose to nose 300 yards east of Multnomah Falls. They had laid down a railroad tie inlaid with walnut lettering that read ORNN Company 1882. Judge Matthew P. Deedy and the Honorable Joseph N. Dolph gave speeches about progress and the value of the railroad connecting Portland to the Inland Empire. A little less than a year later, on September 8, 1883, during the Gold Spike celebration, the railroad celebrated the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. The train stopped at Multnomah Falls en route to the end of the railroad in Portland, Oregon. Passengers headed to the final celebration in Portland gathered in front of Multnomah Falls for this photo. A log footbridge spans the gap above the lower falls. The Oregon Railroad and Navigation Company clearly saw Multnomah Falls as an important attraction along the route of the railroad. Surveyor Robert Short made this map in 1860. He surveyed the Oregon shore of the Columbia River and divided the land into lots. Horsetail Creek is labeled Falls Creek, Oniana Creek is labeled Kenyon Creek, and Multnomah Creek is labeled Coon Creek. Multnomah Falls is in Township 1 North, Range 6 East, Section 7. The map was filed in the Oregon City Land Office and the Multnomah County Deed Office. Again, Multnomah Creek is labeled Coon Creek. There are 4 lots in Section 7. Each lot on the map shows the acreage of the lot. Lot 1 contains 56.96 acres. Lot 2 contains 47.4 acres. Lot 3 contains 57.4 acres. Lot 4 contains 53.1 acres. Please note that the total acres in Lot 1 through 3 is 161.76 acres, which is just 1.76 acres more than the acreage allowed to be homesteaded by the Homestead Act. The first claim to land at Multnomah Falls was made by the railroad in 1884. Under an act of Congress on March 3, 1875, the railroad could establish 20 acres for station buildings, depots, machine shops, side tracks, turnouts, and water stations. The railroad was required to submit a plat to the government land office showing the 20 acres they declared as depot land. The railroad built a small office at the foot of the falls. They eventually built a passenger shed by the tracks, and many people believe they built the log footbridge spanning the gap above the lower falls. The railroad did not file a deed for the depot land in the Multnomah County deed record. The railroad's claim included the prime real estate at Multnomah Falls, the flat ground between the railroad tracks and where the ground begins to rise towards the falls, the flat bench just to the west of the path up to the viewpoint of the falls, and the flat area at the viewpoint. Federal and state land could be claimed under numerous acts of Congress. In 1891, the land at Multnomah Falls was federal land. Lots 1 through 3 centered on Multnomah Falls and totaled 161.76 acres. It could be purchased for about $200 as a cash entry under the Preemption Act of 1820, or homesteaded for free under the Homestead Act of 1863. We suffer from a romantic misunderstanding of homesteaders. We venerate their rugged individualism, self-sufficiency, and autonomy, typically by producing their own food, energy, and other necessities. There's no doubt that many settlers fit this stereotype, but there are others who accessed the Homestead Act to acquire land but didn't truly fulfill the role of a homesteader. The Homestead Act was exploited by individuals and companies who wanted to acquire free land to extract natural resources, namely timber, for its intrinsic value or for the many other purposes for which the land could be used. William C Griswold did not match the romantic vision of the homesteader. He was about 70 years old when he filed the application and was recognized as a claim agent or speculator. He was an infamous Oregonian who was a merchant at Salem, Oregon in the 1850s, and as agent for Indian war claims, he defrauded the federal government out of about $40,000. He faced numerous lawsuits in state and federal courts, spent some time in prison, and because of this infamy, no one has written a biography about his role in Oregon and other places. His daughter and son, Miss Jenny M. Griswold and William Tudor Griswold, played important roles in the homestead at Multnomah Falls and the logging operation at Oneonta Gorge. I will produce a separate video or series of videos about William C. Griswold and his family. This is the entry in the 1891 Portland City Directory listing William C. Griswold as a claim agent, and his residence is on L Street, which now is known as Washington Street, at the corner of Water. This was in East Portland, down by the Willamette River. Griswold lived on Water Street in East Portland. Industrial buildings like sawmills, fruit canneries, lime works, and the Standard Oil Company had facilities in East Portland close to the railroad and on the river. The Oregon City General Land Office was a place to determine which federal land was available to be claimed, to file the claim, and submit all paperwork to prove the claim. The Oregon City General Land Office kept a ledger that recorded claims made against tracts of government land. These are the entries for Township 1 North, Range 6 East, Section 7. Griswold is shown as a claimant for lots 1, 2, and 3. This ledger also contains notations about letters or actions taken against a claim. April 29th, 1891 was a gloomy, rainy day. East Portland and Oregon City had been socked in for about 8 days. William C Griswold, who was about 70 years old, traveled by train or boat from his office and residence on the bank of the Willamette River in East Portland to the General Land Office in Oregon City. On this day, he filed a homestead claim on the land encompassing Multnomah Falls, which included the land from just behind the brink of the falls to the edge of the Columbia River. The legal description was Township 1 North, Range 6 East, Section 7, Lots 1, 2, and 3, containing a little more than 161 acres. He paid $16 to file the application. A handwritten note on the left edge of the application recognizes the rights of the Oregon Railway and Navigation Company to depot land established in 1884. Let's look back about 2 years to see the formation of two companies that planned to take timber off the northeast slopes of Larch Mountain. On August 13, 1889, William T. Griswold formed the Canyon Creek Wagon Road Company with William H. Holmes and Anthony Moore. Canyon Creek is now known as Oneonta Creek. This road was surveyed by William C. Griswold's son, a USGS topographer, William T. Griswold. William C. Griswold's homestead at Multnomah Falls could provide access to timber and water power for the company they were forming. On September 25, 1889, William C.'s son, William T. Griswold, formed the Plum Creek Wagon Road Company with William H. Holmes and Anthony Moore. They proposed a toll road from Bonneville to the summit above Bull Run. Plum Creek is now known as Tanner Creek. Again, this road was surveyed and mapped by William T. Griswold. The Canyon Creek and Plum Creek wagon roads formed the beginning of their logging endeavors to pull timber off the northeast slopes of Larch Mountain. If W.C. Griswold homesteaded and gained title to the timber and water resources of Multnomah Falls, it would contribute to the logging ventures of the Cascade Land and Logging Company. A logging camp would be established at the mouth of Oneonta Gorge. I will release a separate video about the Cascade Land and Logging Company. This is a modern map showing Township 1 North, Range 6 East, Section 7. Griswold homesteaded lots 1, 2, and 3, which is shown on this map in yellow. The railroad depot land is shown in green. Multnomah Falls Lodge is shown by the rectangle on the railroad land within the green area. Multnomah Falls is shown in Lot 2 and lies within the Griswold homestead. The following video shows the eastern side of the Griswold homestead looking across Lot 1. It was filmed from the spot on this map marked in purple, view west from here. This is from the eastern border of Lot 1, Township 1 North, Range 6 East of the Willamette Meridian, Section 7. And I'm going to pan down now and show you the Columbia River Highway. This is looking west on the Columbia River Highway from this borderline. And this was some of the land that William Griswold homesteaded in 1891. You can see down there that it's the viaduct of the Columbia River Highway, and they're working on it. The following video shows the western side of the Griswold homestead looking across Lot 3. It was filmed from the spot on this map marked in purple, view east from here. You can see the top of Multnomah Falls. Multnomah Falls falls down into the valley, the stream flows around, and Multnomah Creek flows into Benson Lake. A surveying line goes right across the mouth of the lake, and that line is the western line of Lot 3, Township 1 North, Range 6 East, Section 7. That lot contains 57.40 acres. When you go farther to the east, about every quarter of a mile there's another lot. So lots 1, 2, and 3 span this area by about 3/4 of a mile. During the time that William C. Griswold was supposed to be living on the homestead at Multnomah Falls, he lived in several locations in East Portland. This map shows the 4 places that Griswold lived between 1891 and 1895. This is the entry in the 1892 Portland City Directory listing William C. Griswold's residence as 10 Union Avenue. Union Avenue is now known as Martin Luther King Boulevard. If his residence is listed as East Portland, we have to wonder if he lived at Multnomah Falls during 1892. In the 1890s, the streets of East Portland were vibrant. Here is an illustration of 4th Street in East Portland. This is close to W. C. Griswold's residence in 1892. Gustav W. Nelson, also known as George, was the section foreman for the Oregon Railway and Navigation Company along the stretch of railroad below the falls. He lived with his family in Bridalveil and was the eyes and ears of the railroad. The railroad made several challenges to the Griswold homestead. On March 17, 1893, Nelson filed a complaint on behalf of the railroad in the Oregon City General Land Office, claiming Griswold's homestead had been abandoned. On April 27, 1893, 2 years after W. C. Griswold initiated a homestead claim at Multnomah Falls, W. C.'s son, William T. Griswold, Richard C. Hart, and Eugene D.K. Townsend filed articles of incorporation for the Cascade Land and Logging Company. This company established a lumber camp at Oneonta Creek and intended to bring timber off the northeast slopes of Larch Mountain via the Canyon Creek Wagon Road. Griswold's homestead at the falls could contribute timber and water resources for the logging company. The Cascade Land and Logging Company will be the subject of a future YouTube video. This is the 1894 Portland City Directory listing William C. Griswold's residence as 374 East 6th. He moved 6 blocks away from the Willamette River. If his residence is listed as East Portland, we have to wonder how much time he spent at Multnomah Falls. His son, William T. Griswold, is also listed in the 1894 City Directory. He was employed by the U.S. Geological Survey. He is listed as having an office in the Goodnow building and lived at 4th and Alder. Major flood of the Willamette River inundated much of East Portland in 1894. The gray area on this map shows the reach of the flood. The red square on this map shows where William C. Griswold lived in 1894. He was just 2 blocks above the flood zone. He may have been exposed to diphtheria due to unsanitary conditions from the floodwater in East Portland or at Multnomah Falls. George W. Nelson filed a complaint on March 17, 1893, that Griswold had abandoned his homestead claim. A hearing was had before the local officers in the Oregon City Land Office, who dismissed the complaint on January 30, 1894. On July 19, 1894, the railroad appealed the decision of the Land Office to the Secretary of the Interior. In this letter of October 11, 1895, the Secretary of the Interior confirmed the decision of the Oregon City Land Office. Griswold's homestead entry was found to be in good order. W. C. Griswold was admitted to Good Samaritan Hospital on December 31, 1894. He was released from the hospital on June 23, 1896. He may have been suffering from diphtheria. Griswold was in the Good Samaritan Hospital for such a long time, he is listed in the Portland City Directory in 1895 as boarding at the hospital. Newspapers prior to World War II would report the whereabouts of people who lived in the community. The Oregonian reported on September 6, 1896, that Griswold and his daughter, Miss J. Montague Griswold, were spending the summer at their place at Multnomah Falls. William C. Griswold had 2 children. His son, William Tudor, has been mentioned previously. His daughter, Miss Jenny Montague Griswold, also played an important role at Multnomah Falls. Jenny lived in Portland from 1894 to 1899. In September 1896, W. C. Griswold and Jenny Griswold spent some time at Multnomah Falls. Jenny returned to Portland September 20th, 1896. On November 17, 1896, W. C. Griswold was readmitted to Good Samaritan Hospital. He would remain in the hospital up until the time he would finalize the Multnomah Falls homestead. Claimants are required to make a notice to the public that they will prove they have fulfilled the requirements of the Homestead Act. Griswold published this notice in the Troutdale Champion from January 15th to February 19th, 1897. The proof would be presented on February 20th, 1897. Albert J. Moore, 68 years old, and Anthony Moore, 63, both of Bridalveil, were witnesses that Griswold fulfilled the homesteading requirements. As a side note, Anthony and Albert J. Moore were partners with Griswold in the logging operation at the mouth of Oneonta Gorge, which will be the subject of a future video. Making a homestead claim requires the claimant to occupy and make improvements on the land. Witnesses claimed that William Griswold was absent from the homestead for long periods of time. This letter from Good Samaritan Hospital on February 23, 1897, accounts for Griswold's absence because he was admitted to the Good Samaritan Hospital on December 31, 1894. He was released from the hospital June 23, 1896, but he was readmitted on November 17, 1896, and was in the hospital in February 1897 when he finalized the homestead. This is the application that was filed on February 20th, 1897, to prove that William C. Griswold had fulfilled the requirements to homestead the land at Multnomah Falls. Please note that this application states that the claim is for 161.76 acres, despite the railroad claim to 20 acres in the middle of lots 2 and 3. Griswold testified that he established a residence at Multnomah Falls in the summer of 1891. He built a frame house with a 16 by 24 footprint and 2 doors and 4 windows. He fenced 4 acres for a small garden, which he kept for 4 seasons. He alleged he lived on the homestead with his wife and 2 children up until the last year and a half. He was absent because he was in the hospital. He claimed the land was valuable for timber and grazing. He denied he had sold, conveyed, or mortgaged the land for any purpose. We have thousands of examples of William C. Griswold's signature, and they are generally elegant. His signature on this document indicates just how feeble he was at this time. Where did Griswold build the 16 by 24 house? This building is on the upper part of the railroad land and built by the railroad in about 1883. A railroad diagram shows that this building is 14 by 28. Griswold testified that he built his house in 1891 and it was 16 by 24. This is clearly not the Griswold house. The only other building shown in photos on the site is in this stereo view by O.W. Watson Company, publishers of Spokane. The log footbridge and the Benson Bridge are not shown in this photo, which dates it to circa 1900. The building in the lower left may be the train stop, and the building in the lower right may be the Griswold house. This building is on the lower portion of the railroad land. If anyone has better photos of this building or photos of a third building, please tell me in the comments. This is a closer view of the building in the stereo view. Griswold testified that he built a 16 by 24 house on the homestead. This building could very well be the Griswold house. If anyone has a different explanation for this building, please let me know in the comments. William Griswold. He had a daughter, Jenny, an artist, a real one, with the brush. She heard of Multnomah Falls and went to see them. It was quite a trip. The steamer landed about a half a mile away. A trail led through the brush and a swamp had to be crossed. It so appealed to her artistic nature that she had her father buy the falls. She actually had a vested title to these falls. This is an interesting story, but the author cites no source. Not long after her father gained title to the homestead, Jenny Griswold began inviting visitors to the site. Multnomah Falls has always been an attractive resort for artists, for besides the falls, there are many other good subjects of interest within walking distance, among them Oneonta Gorge. Miss Griswold has granted several requests to camp on the grounds from Eastern artists and their friends, and is quite willing that any who wish should camp there for a few weeks for the purpose of study or recreation, provided they first apply to her at her studio in the Markham Building. Miss Jenny Griswold had an art studio on Southwest 6th and Morrison in Portland in the Markham Building from 1895 to 1899, called the Studio of Fine Arts. Jenny Griswold studied painting in France. This painting of a woman of the cloth is one of her Brittany paintings. The second painting is a still life with lilies and urn with a dragon motif, and was painted by Jenny Griswold in Portland, Oregon in 1898. The third painting is Old Mount Baldy, also known as Mount San Antonio. The mountain is part of the San Gabriel Mountains and can be seen from San Bernardino. Jenny painted it while she was living in Southern California. These three paintings are in my personal collection. Jenny's art will be the topic of a future video. If anyone is aware of a Jenny Griswold painting of Multnomah Falls, please let me know in the comments. Despite his lengthy absence from the homestead, William C. Griswold received a patent for his homestead on June 11, 1897. This is the deed in the Multnomah County Deed Office for his land at Multnomah Falls. The claim contains 161.76 acres. The deed was made on June 11, 1897, but it was recorded on June 9, 1898. It's not unusual for deeds to be made on a specific date, but recorded at a much later date. This is the deed recorded in the Multnomah County Deed Office showing William C. Griswold transferring Multnomah Falls to his daughter, Jenny Griswold. This deed states that the land contains 160 acres, more or less. The deed was made on February 9, 1898, but was recorded on June 9, 1898. Again, it's not unusual for deeds to be made on specific dates, but to be recorded at a later date. We need to return to the first land claim at Multnomah Falls. The claim was made by the railroad in 1884. The railroad established 20 acres for depot grounds in the middle of lots 2 and 3. The railroad's claim included the prime real estate at the falls, the flat ground between the railroad tracks and where the ground begins to rise toward the falls, the flat bench just to the west of the path up to the viewpoint, and the flat area at the viewpoint. Jenny Griswold ignored the railroad's rights to the depot land. Once Jenny Griswold became more aggressive about charging for access to the falls, the railroad became more defensive about its property rights on the site. This is a view to the south across the railroad depot land from near the railroad. None of the land in front of the falls was part of the Griswold homestead. The land rises towards the falls from here. Presently, Multnomah Falls Lodge occupies the biggest piece of land suitable for a building. The land outside of the 20 acres is steep and not suitable for building a house. This is a view from about 50 feet north of the south border of the railroad depot land. The south border is 476 feet from the middle of the railroad bridge over Multnomah Creek. This is the core of the railroad depot land sloping down to the railroad tracks. None of this land was part of the Griswold homestead. This classified ad appeared in the Oregonian in June 1898. It says, "For rent, notice, Multnomah Falls, location and grounds from railroad right-of-way 50 feet, is private property. Picnics and camping privileges must be secured previous to excursions. Trespassers are liable to fine. Secure privileges of us previous. Drake and Barden, rental and employment agents." Jenny realized that churches, the Camera Club, and other organizations were taking hundreds of visitors on excursions to Multnomah Falls. This classified ad appeared in the Oregonian in July 1898. It says, "Warning notice. Excursionists to Multnomah Falls warned to keep off property, as it is not railroad grounds. Secure privileges before advertising excursions at Drake and Barden." Jenny Griswold, with the support of Dr. Albert E. McKay, who practiced medicine at Good Samaritan Hospital, committed her father, William C. Griswold, to the Oregon State Insane Asylum on February 19, 1899. He resided in the asylum until he died on July 13, 1900. Jenny was on her own to deal with her property at Multnomah Falls. Jenny and the railroad disagreed about who owned the land. The railroad insisted that it owned the land and removed improvements erected by Miss Griswold. The railroad stopped their trains at the falls and let excursionists loose to walk about and take photos. The Camera Club visited Multnomah Falls on July 30, 1899. Before the club left Portland, Miss Griswold informed them that she would collect $10 for the whole party instead of 10 cents per person. The club didn't pay her. Some members objected to the fee. When the club arrived at the falls, they disembarked on the railroad right-of-way. A representative for Miss Griswold was on site to collect the fees. 60 dimes were collected despite over 300 people visiting the site. Many club members thought it was a joke and enjoyed Griswold Park for free. Ironically, Jenny Griswold was a member of the Camera Club. Miss Griswold said, "I am under considerable expense to keep the park in condition. In the last few months have spent over $100 in clearing the ground of underbrush, repairing the paths, and putting up fences. It takes money to repair the depredations made by tramps and by vandals, who tear off the doors of my house to use as tables for picnics, and for this reason I have placed the charge of admission to the park, especially on visiting excursions, which reap a harvest on their fares. This charge was paid by all the large excursions last year and in lump sums, so that neither the public nor my representatives were annoyed by the collection of a small amount for each individual. The railroad company has made repeated depredations on my land, recently destroying a fence which had been put up at my orders, which was not even within the right-of-way claimed on each side of the railroad. The railroad would not even transport the lumber, and it had to be sent up by boat and packed up to the falls post by post, board by board, on the backs of men. Just as a fence was being completed, there came a crew of railroad employees who pulled up every post and threw the lumber in the bottom near the track, where it is now floating around in the high water. Miss Griswold is enthusiastic over the falls site and has plans for the future of a well-kept park with a fine hotel and a summer resort that would become one of the famous places of the country. Jenny Griswold wanted to make it clear that she was not responsible for the unbusinesslike methods preferred by the Camera Club. She proposed that instead of collecting 10 cents per person to visit the falls, she would reduce the rate to the Camera Club and charge a flat fee of $10 for the use of the park. The Camera Club declined her offer. According to this article, Miss Griswold is just about ready to leave for California and is not sure when she will ever return. Her pictures are being packed, but there is still time left to view her latest effort, a noble portrait of Reverend D.C. Garrett, together with some charming scenes done in Brittany, while she was pursuing her studies under Bouguereau and other French artists. It is not surprising that Jenny decided to move away from Portland. She never stayed in any one place for very long. William C. Griswold died on July 13, 1900, in the Oregon State Insane Asylum. This obituary is the lengthiest biography of Griswold, however it is riddled with errors. It truly states, "He was perhaps the most enterprising citizen that Salem ever had and did much for the upbuilding of this town." The funeral services were held in the Salem Unity Church. He was buried in the Salem Pioneer Cemetery. Presently, there's no headstone on his grave. I plan to produce videos about William C. Griswold and his family to show how this man was no ordinary homesteader. The Oregon Railway and Navigation Company established 20 acres as depot grounds at Multnomah Falls. William C. Griswold homesteaded about 141 acres surrounding the falls. He granted the land to his daughter, Jenny Griswold. Jenny owned the falls, but she did not own the land between the railroad tracks and the view of the lower falls. She tried to charge visitors 10 cents to disembark on the railroad land. She moved to Southern California and abandoned her effort to levy access fees at the falls. Collecting 10 cents to see the falls was minor in comparison to what was yet to come. Jenny owned the land and would find other ways to make money from the land. This illustration by Harold Saylor DeLay graphically shows us money grabbers diverting Multnomah Creek to extract as much wealth as possible from Multnomah Falls, despite the impact on the scenic values. The next video in this series will show how Miss Griswold exploited the land for financial gain, despite public interest in the scenic values of the falls.